afternoon. I think we are ready to start. Let me just start by introducing myself. I'm Nareen Davis, and I'm from the Department of Geography, Geoinformatics, and Meteorology. And what you might not know about Prof. Ramutsindela is that he actually holds a dual affiliation here at UP as well. So he is affiliated with Future Africa, but we are also very proud to say that he also belongs to the Department of GGM. So which is why I'm here, and I'm very excited to introduce him today. So welcome to the session today, where we're going to look at Prof. Ramutsindela's focus, and I think his passion project, really, which is the ideas around sustainability transformations. Today he'll be discussing issues surrounding the meaning of sustainability transformation, how we derive at these meanings, and actually what his intention is today is really to curate ideas, to co-create so that we can think about setting the agenda for these sustainability transformations. So I think the idea today is to participate, to engage. We have this great mind amongst us, and I think the co-creation part of the exercise should be embraced. So we will do the formal introduction of Prof. Ramutsindela, but I'd like to hand over to the Acting Director for the Future Africa, Professor Wanda, to please just do the formal opening for us.
It's afternoon already, afternoon everyone, and welcome to Future Africa. So Future Africa is the University of Pretoria. You can see Pan-African platform for transformative research, really looking at problems that we need to solve in Africa using transdisciplinary approaches. It's all collaborative. That's our other poster here on the other side. And it's a space where we can meet and convene and share ideas. And I'm really excited to hear Prof. Maano speak today, who's our Chair in Sustainable Transformations in Africa. Very exciting chair, you've heard from the introductions. It's a chair between us and the University of Cape Town. And that is typically also the space that Future Africa function in. We're not just a UP space. We really try and have international collaborations, Pan-African, but also national between universities in South Africa. So Maano, we're really looking forward to hearing you speak. You always have great ideas, so I'm sure this is going to be a very productive discussion and dialogue with everybody present. But welcome to Future Africa.
Okay, so now it's my esteemed honor to give you a short bio of Prof. Ramutsindela. I wanted to memorize it, but I couldn't, Prof. And you'll hear now why, right? You'll hear why it was hard. Okay, so I'm apologizing for reading it, but you'll start to understand why I'm reading it. So Prof. Ramutsindela is the UP-UCT Future Africa Chair in Sustainability Transformation, and I'm going to interject also an extraordinary professor in GGM because I've got ulterior motives. And then he is a professor of human geography at UCT's Department of Environmental and Geographical Science. He is the co-lead of the Africa-Europe Cluster of Research Excellence on the politics of sustainable development. He is a Canon Collins Scholar. He holds a PhD in geography from Royal Holloway, University of London, a master's in geography from the University of the North, Turfloop, formerly known as. He has served as Dean of the Faculty of Science at UCT. He is a Fellow of the Society of South African Geographers and a member of the Academy of Science of South Africa. He has held visiting fellowships at Harvard University and the University of Western Australia. He was a distinguished chair at Macalester College and an inaugural visiting professor at the University of Geneva. His current research focuses on socio-ecological relations and the political ecology of peace parks. He is also the author of Transfrontier Conservation in Africa at the Confluence of Capital, Politics and Nature, and he is the co-editor of the Violence of Conservation in Africa publication. So with that, it is my esteemed honor to welcome Maano onto the stage so that we can start the collaborative process. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks, Nerine, for the kind introductions. You know, when I checked the weather today, I said, you know, who will come today? It's one of those days you feel, you know, you want to be laid back, and it's school holidays, and so. But I'm glad that you committed yourself to, you know, to come and have an engagement with me. I'm going to present some thoughts. When I took up this position exactly in April last year, so this is 1 year after taking up this position, I didn't thought much about sustainability transformations. But I knew that whatever I was doing has something to do with it. And so I didn't worry much about, you know, whether my work was going to be relevant or not, because I've always been trying to look at sustainability from different angles. So what I'm going to do today is to, you know, just present 3 things that we might have conversations about. And the first one is ideology. You know, just to reflect a bit about ideology. And the reason for reflecting on ideology is because I've been trying to understand where sustainability comes from as a concept, where sustainability comes from as an idea, what it does to different people in different places. And so I thought ideology will help open up the space for us to think about sustainability. But one of the other reasons for thinking about ideology and sustainability is because people are beginning to write about the connection between these two. But they are writing about these connections from different disciplinary backgrounds. So your social sciences, of course, that's where ideology is a big thing. But sustainability is a big thing on natural sciences. So there is no conversation between the two. And so I thought using both ideology and sustainability could begin to bring this transformative element of thinking about sustainability. I've also realized that much of sustainability has to do with the future. We're all looking to a better future. But the future is also an idea. And there is no one future. And so that's why I put futures there. And as I will show later, there's even a discipline now about the futures, which has been there since the 1960s. And you know, we are in Future Africa here, which is 5 years old. But the idea of the future has been there. And what it does to the human mind, for me, is important. And what it does to human agency is also very critical. So I thought I'll bring these 3 things together today in the lecture. So I think the first reaction that you get from people when you talk about ideology, they just run away. They say, no, we're not dealing with ideologies and things like that, we're just doing science. But actually they're running away from themselves, okay? Because the whole idea of ideology means that they've got a particular interpretation of it, which is founded on their own ideas of ideology. So what happens, and I'm reminded of a student who wanted to do my course, my honors course, at UCT, and this honors course was titled Capital, Politics and Nature. And then the student wanted to do a master, it was a master's student, who wanted to do a course on, discourse, and I have to explain what this course is about. As soon as I mentioned politics, the student just said, I'm not coming for politics, I'm going away. But of course, later on, when the student wanted to do a dissertation, says, can we talk about your course? I just said it's too late. Okay. So the example that I'm giving here is that we have got ideas about ideas. And what happens with those ideas is that we just dismiss them without even wanting to engage them. And so here, I want us to perhaps reflect a bit on the idea of sustainability, and put it perhaps in a bigger, in a broader ideological concept. And just to give you, a short summary, and of course it's not easy to summarize, the whole concept of ideology, but this is something that philosophers grappled with in the 18th and 19th centuries about ideology. And the concept itself is credited to the French philosopher, de Tracy, and was taken up by a number of very strong philosophers who, in the social sciences, especially in philosophy courses, they will be well known. We might not know many of these, but I think Hegel will be known for many people who have done social sciences. So would be Max Weber, and of course Karl Marx. I mean, the whole Marxism comes from that as an ideology. But what they've been grappling with is more about how to shape human minds and the tools for doing that, and the objectives of shaping the human mind. And so if we think about education goes a long way in shaping our worldviews, in shaping our minds. And you can indoctrinate people easily through education, and this is what is happening in the history of education itself. But what is important for our discussion here is the different context in which the concept of ideology has been used in different disciplines, but also in the struggles. If one goes back to many of the struggles in society, they've used ideology to wage their struggles. Very typical examples will be the struggle between communism and capitalism, and that the whole society can be mobilized to fight against communism, and communists to fight against capitalism. So it's these broad ideas that can be mobilized. But I like this common usage which I stumbled into when reading Versiren, that ideology pertains to a set of conventions, views, political repertoires, thought forms, and an implicit but determinate conceptual ordering of ideas. And for me, that's the most important part that I want to lift out is the conceptual ordering of ideas and the tools that we use to order those ideas. But the result of those orderings are usually cognitive rigidity. And I think it's important to go back to the example I gave about people running away once you introduce the concept of ideology. It's the rigidity. They don't want to hear this. Okay? So we have been trained in our minds to avoid everything we don't want. And I was challenged when I was trying to do my own PhD. I was given a book that said everything that was against all I knew. And it was very hard to read the book. I also tried to read Henry Lefebvre on the production of space, and one of the senior supervisors said to me, I hope you'll understand this book. I said, well, if professors can't understand this book, who am I? But later on I realized there are certain things that people just don't want to read because it doesn't flow with their lives. And so this is what cognitive rigidity does, is that it becomes a barrier to knowledge. It makes us feel that this is something we don't want to deal with. And we know a number of examples in society where, when people introduce a particular topic or concept, then you have got a sense that, people don't want to deal with this. You can see this in sessions when you have got conferences. Some sessions are not popular and others are, depending on what is being discussed. Okay. What cognitive rigidity does regarding sustainability is that it freezes our minds. It freezes and shapes the way we react to what appears to be unsustainable. And I'll give you an example of how I reacted to a sustainability, something related to sustainability. I went to a conference in Utrecht last year, and then there was no meat at this conference, the whole conference. And so we're just eating leaves and, so we're all vegetarian. And so this is a certain sustainability. But then I started to think, well, because they think that, the idea is that the cattle, they're contributing to gas emissions, and, we know the story. And actually people in Botswana don't like this debate because they've got lots of cattle and good meat. So what I struggled with was not the food, was what it will mean in Africa not to have meat, not to have cow. How will people pay lobola? How will people have funerals? Because the cow is not just about the food. It has got multiple meanings. So that is what I struggled with, to say you could have this sustainability translating into a value system that then clashes with the realities of life, and then you will say other groups of people are not sustainable. So cognitive rigidity would mean that whatever we think is sustainable should not be questioned. Okay. So that's the example I'm trying to give here. Questioning something that is good, is sustainable, but it might not be applicable to many other groups of people. We know that during COVID, social distancing was a big thing, because in other places there was just no distance to make. In the informal settlements, people are just, there's no distance. Let me move on to another point. So sustainability has got its own history, which I think we don't pay attention to. So in 1972, 3 people, scientists, came together to model the future of the world using computers. And so that's where we can trace sustainability from. And they published this book, The Limits to Growth, which was very influential. The discussion was, what will happen if the human population keeps growing on the planet? Will we have enough food? Will we have enough water? What will happen to industries? So they were not necessarily worried about too many other things, except what the future might look like, given these variables. And then they decided that it will be important for them to develop a scenario about the future. And that's where sustainability actually became an important way of looking at the world. And that is where sustainability became more futuristic. What is the future going to look like? So the celebration for the Club of Rome, which is what this group ultimately was called, the 50-year celebration was in Cape Town a few years ago, 2022. They celebrated 50 years of the Club of Rome. But that meeting, that modeling, shaped the way we think about the future, about sustainability as well. Now, if we step back and say, okay, so who was at the table when people were thinking about the future? There were these three people. Thinking about the future of the world, which is important because these were scientists. It also shows the power of science. And of course, later on, we had, I'm sure we all know, our common future, which now we moved to the 1980s, where the debate about the environment and the development was key to the discussion about our common future. I don't have to go back to that. I suppose that most of you would know about it. The development is the one that is destroying the environment. Now, how do we make sure that the environment and development go together? And that then made sustainability a very important concept. But again, it was more about the future. If people are going to build roads, houses, and so forth, what is the future going to look like? But if we sit back and say that who was concerned about the development? It was those who had already developed their countries. That if the others want to be like us, it will be disastrous for us all. So the other people should stop. We know now. We know that development is not good for the environment, and now we must do something else. We must be more sustainable. And I think this is the debate which is still going on today. Whether you talk about climate change, or people are still talking about the very same ideas of development. So it is quite important to have this history. Now, out of this, discussions have developed even disciplines, a discipline called the futures. So there are people who call themselves futurists. Okay, I know that in other traditions, people are, they always want to know the future. They can throw the bones and say, how is the future going to be like? Which is fine, but they don't call themselves futurists. Now, this is a discipline in the social sciences where people are working about the future. They're always thinking about the future. There's even a journal of future studies, if you want to read more about this. And one of the influential author, Wendell Bell, has even developed books. And this is just one volume that I'm showing you. There is another volume just on the futures. How do we study the future? What are the values for studying the future? And so that's one of the things that they've been doing. Now, what this does then is to bring us to some understanding of sustainability, which has now been put in encyclopedias of different kinds. I mean, if one just Google the concept of sustainability, you come with hundreds of definitions. But they all boil down to, in a general sense, maintaining a process or maintaining a particular outcome. So it's more about maintaining what you have, looking into the future. But there's also a sense of trying to balance economic, social, and environmental variables. Now, this goes back to the Club of Rome, where they were trying to work on these variables. Of course, it depends on which variables you have that you want to balance. I mean, the more variables you have, the more difficult it becomes to balance them. And so one has to find a way of using component analysis, which is you try to bring the variables into something that's common so that you reduce their numbers so that you can work them through. But don't worry much about that at this stage. The point I wanted to make is that sustainability, even today, is understood as something that has to hold together different variables. More importantly, for the future, in order to create a particular future. Now, I've given you some sense of what has been developing in terms of ideas. But where is science today? The science of sustainability today, or sustainability research, maybe I should put it that way. Sustainability science and sustainability research might mean different things. But what is more common now, which is also futuristic, is to measure where we are in the world in terms of variables. And so we have what is commonly known now as planetary boundaries in the science of the planet, to say that this is how much we have about water. If we go beyond this limit, if we use water beyond this limit, we will be in trouble. This is how much we have about land. We have degraded it to this point. If we go beyond this, we are in trouble. So these arrows that this what you see here is it's more about if we use land use. If we have got this land under use for now, and they can say how much land is left for us to use. If we use more land than what is left for us, it's almost like we are in the overdraft. We have gone beyond what we are supposed to do. The same with fresh water. And we are supposed to be, everything is supposed to be within this boundary. You can see as soon as you move beyond this boundary, you go into the yellow. So it means that you are beginning to have difficulties. You need to manage situations better. If you don't manage them, of course, you go into serious problems. And there are people who are working on the atmospheric sciences, who are, I know colleagues who are working on dust, for example. The aerosols, we have all changed the sprays that we use because of the findings that some of them are actually polluting the environment. Okay. So we have quite a number of, the big one, of course, is climate change, where people are always measuring the temperatures. We have gone already beyond where we should be, and there are warning signs. All these meetings about IPCC is about to remind people about where we are in the boundaries. And if we go far beyond what we are supposed to be within, then we are in big trouble. Now, this has become very powerful now. It is the focus of science. The science of today is about making sure that we don't go beyond these boundaries. We don't worsen the situation that we have. But I think it's quite easy for us to be so worried about these boundaries and looking at each of these. But there's something missing here. Where are the people? Nobody is saying that if poverty, nobody is saying if poverty goes to this level, we are in danger. Nobody is saying that. Nobody is saying that if inequality, using all variables, if inequality goes beyond this, we are in danger. That's missing. So the social components are missing. And we have to ask the question, why? If we are really to be successful in our sustainability endeavors, we have to get all the other variables in. I mean, we don't have warnings like if the wealthy people go beyond this in making their wealth, they're putting everybody else in danger. Shouldn't we have that? Where we can say, now, you are wealthy enough, don't do anything anymore. Okay. Of course, we don't want to do this because, the wealthy people fund all these things. We want them to be more wealthy so they can fund the research and they can, help us and so forth. So that is becoming a criticism. And I'll come back to that, but I thought I should point it out here. Now, having said that, the science about sustainability has been very important because it has changed the way we think about. So I just thought I'll show you, without wanting to reveal my travels, but this is the building where the conference was that I attended last week. And what made me to be excited about this building was that they said sustainability lives here. And I said, wow, I'll meet sustainability and greet sustainability. Because it sounds like a person. Okay. And so it's the way that the business has also tapped into sustainability. So you have got in the building, these are the things in the building, by the way, where they've got all these sustainable development goals. And when you go in there, it's a very expensive place. It's not sustainable for somebody who doesn't have money. It's also very close to the statue of George Washington. Okay. And so you have business making use of sustainability as a loose concept. The same with sustainable development, but I don't want to go much into sustainable development, except to say that it has become so common that even politicians will end the speech by saying sustainable development. And you wonder whether everybody knows what these things are. But of course it is important, and universities are expected to have these futures pathways on sustainability. I mean, universities now are being measured on sustainability. They're being ranked on sustainability. I think Pretoria is doing well on the ranking on sustainability. I think in the country, I can't remember, it was in the top 5 last year. And so universities are involved in what will be measured as being sustainable campus. Okay, that's where we have got cashless places and so forth. We have to be sustainable. Okay, so universities are also tasked with this role. But let me go back to the point I raised earlier on about the human condition. How can sustainability be successful if we don't bring in variables that deal with the human condition? And I think that's, for me, it's a critical area of conversation. So there are people who are beginning to really work on this. And those who are working on these are recent books. The Dark Laboratory, I think, was published this year, 2025. The Spatial Futures was published last year. Now, what is common between these books is that they are bringing these human conditions not only of today, but historically. We might think that we are at the tipping points because we have used much water because of industrialization, but they will say no. We are at the tipping points not because of that. The tipping point started long time ago. So there is the historical part of sustainability, which is coming from the social sciences. They are making an argument that if we are to think about sustainability, we have got to historicize it. Was it not when so many people were enslaved and then they couldn't live sustainably, and that set in chain a number of events? And so that's why this book on the climate crisis is about. I mean, you could just read reviews on the Dark Laboratory. It's more about that, but also to question the idea of where did the Anthropocene start. You know, and very often we just say, you know, industrialization is blamed for this, coal and the rest, but the human condition has also been a critical part of sustainability. Society is not sustainable today because it has been destroyed. So that's the main argument about these books. And many other scholars have gone into this critique. But of course, there's a downside to this critique, and that's how I see it. They are doing the opposite. When the futurists are looking to the future and natural scientists are looking to the future, they are looking to the past and completely locked in the past. And I think that, for me, is a very critical part. The social sciences are doing a great job. They're critiquing sustainability. But there's a tendency also to go to it's almost like in politics, you've got the far right and the far left. And people keep going in these directions until they don't meet. And they can't agree on something. And the country collapses. But I think for me, and this is, I'd like to hear your thoughts about this, it's going backward, going into the past. And I think it's important. We cannot, in my view, build a sustainable future without linking that future to the past. Let me give an example here. If you take Stanton and Alexander, or Pretoria and Hammanskraal, okay, the futures of these two places can't be the same. Why? It's because of the history. Now the question is how does one pay or bridge the gap? How does one establish the basis on which those who have suffered from other systems can be on a position to be sustainable? And I think if I were to go to somebody who is struggling to have a meal per day and say, we're all vegetarian for the sake of the future, I mean, I'll be talking Greek to them. Well, I hope they wouldn't understand Greek, but they wouldn't understand what I'm talking about because it's far removed from their reality. And so these two axes, for me, are important for rethinking sustainability. If we are to do something transformative, which is our mandate at Future Africa, we have to come to terms with these two opposite directions. Okay, I see the clock is ticking, but let me give you my reflections. Sort of my own ideas of how I see these things. You don't have to agree with me, okay? But these are my ideas. Actually, you need to push me back on them. I mean, the first parting thought for me would be that, conceptions of sustainability are tied up with broader societal environmental questions. And what do I mean by that? So the example of Ramutsindela in Pretoria, illustrate the point that I'm making here is we have to avoid, so to speak, to look at sustainability from the perspective of the middle class. What is the future of a middle class? People who have, people who can choose to drink tea or coffee or decaf or this and that. Of course, the middle class is being squeezed as well now, but let me not go there. Okay. But if you have got the middle class and they're thinking about sustainability, that's a different way of thinking about the future. There are also people who are thinking about the future as somewhere outside the planet Earth. Some of these explorations to Mars and this and that, people are looking for signs of life. Okay, if everything goes bad with the planet Earth, where can we go? I mean, they will fly to these places if there's life. I mean, why is this? Why do you think there's so much interest on where is the other life? It has to do with the future. But these are the people who can afford, and most of them would have been part of the destruction that they're running away from. And I'm not saying that all the business people, all the wealthy people are destroying the environment. But if you just see here in Gauteng, you have got the problem with acid water. People have mined the gold, the diamonds, and have left. Okay, and we've got to struggle with this. So these are societal issues that cannot be addressed by simply looking at the future and not what has happened to the environment. I think the environment itself needs to be repaired. It's just that the environment doesn't have its own voice, but we have destroyed the environment such that we need to repair it. If we don't repair the environment, what happens is that we degrade human life. I mean, when I say the middle class lens, I was thinking of what we experienced in Cape Town a few years ago. We all know day zero. And everybody was just so worried, day zero, we're going to run out of water. Okay? And there were all discussions about how much time you should take in the shower. And the discussion had nothing to do with whether the body is big or small. You take these minutes. It's almost like, but there are people who have always been in day zero. And that's a reality. You go to some of these far rural areas, people have no water. So there's day zero there. We can talk about emissions, pollutions, and so forth, but there are people who haven't done any of these things. Okay? So they are already sustainable. I mean, in terms of these measurements, if we go back to that boundary issue, there are people who have lived within the boundaries for years. But we are saying to them they must also change. So that's what I mean by societal issues. The other point that I want to make in the 2 more points in the last 3 minutes that I have, Noreen, I don't think that there is common. There is no common future. There's nothing common in the common future. That sounds like tautology, but the point I want to make here is that there are different futures. There are varieties of futures. And we should cater for them if we're to be sustainable. And to assume that we are all in one spaceship is to avoid the reality that we're different. It's almost like, in the aircraft, the business class, economy class, and so forth. So if there's fire, there are people who will be the first to come out. So we're not equal, and we don't pay the same price. So I think it's important for us, in thinking about sustainability, to differentiate how it should be applied at different levels, at different countries. And I think this is where the discussion is now with Sustainable Development Goals. The Sustainable Development Goals in the UK should be different from the Sustainable Development Goals in South Africa. We are not at the same level, and we cannot achieve the same sustainability. I mean, in Europe at the moment, if you want to travel, you're advised to take a train. You have to justify why you should fly. If I were to take the train from Cape Town to here, I wouldn't have been here. There's just no train that connects the two cities. Of course, there is another train that can take the whole day and night and so forth. Now, if you say you want to go to Zimbabwe, there's no train that goes there. I mean, so it's a very important element of sustainability that we should engage with, that we don't have a common future. And here at Future Africa, what we're thinking about through the domain that I hold is to begin to break this down, to say, how do we ensure that this is a future for Africa that is different from the future in Europe? Even though the publications coming from Europe, they could be suggesting this is the way to go. And we have to think critically about that. Now, the other last point that I want to make is, I want to come back to this idea of the sciences going in different directions, the social sciences and natural sciences. I'm using this label for convenience, because I mean, they may not be something natural in natural sciences, okay? But that's a debate for another day. So if we have got very powerful groups of scientists working into the future, and other groups that are less funded going into the past, we're actually just making sustainability a very difficult area. And I think, for me, the core of sustainability should be to bridge these two. And we have to find out what will bridge them, so that we can then speak a common language and have a sense of how we could, in our different areas, circumstances, and countries, move in some sustainable ways. I could go on this, but let me thank you for giving my audience. Thank you very much, Nerine. You can take over your chair. Thank you.
Thank you. It's difficult to be the timekeeper if you are so deep in the discussion. I almost forgot that I keep time. Can I ask the two discussants to please join us on the stage? We thank you, Maano, for giving us some food for thought. I don't know, Prof. Maano, I think we might need you to join as well. So I'm calling Dr. Mashonga and Dr. Mohende from University of Botswana. I think you can, I'll give one of you, I'll give the mic. And then what we have, the program is set aside 30 minutes for the discussants to just sort of highlight some key aspects from the talk that Prof. Maano has done. Can I maybe give each of the discussants 10 minutes? Can I give you, yeah, I'll give you 10 minutes each. And then we will have another 10 minutes for Prof to respond to some of the questions. And we will open it up to the rest of the panel later on. So I'm not sure who wants to go first. Ladies first.
Okay. My name is Tafadzwa Mshonga. I am a research fellow at the Center for the Advancement of Scholarship here at UP. I should declare that I'm a student of Maano. Yeah, we have worked together for about 6 years now. So I don't know if this is a good spot to be in today. Or is it payback time? So the one thing that I've been able to do, and quite comfortably, is to listen to Maano speak. I can listen to Maano speak like the entire day, like literally until the cows come home. I can just sit there and listen when he speaks. So I just want to say thank you, Maano, again for such an informative and also critical examination of the ways in which sustainability is not just about scientific knowledge or just informed by scientific knowledge, but also really about the underlying political, cultural, and economic ideologies. And what I've taken away from this lecture is really that science is not neutral. While it plays quite a significant role in informing what we now know as sustainability today, it's also quite often shaped by political structures, power structures. It's also defined by funding priorities and dominant worldviews that kind of shape what sustainability is. And the other thing that I also sort of take away from this, or what stays with me, is how sustainability is often presented as an objective, as an apolitical concept. And I'm immediately thinking about how sustainable use came to be way back in the 1600s. I don't think you did mention this name, Maano. The German forester Hans van Carlowitz, who introduced the idea of sustainable use back then in the 1600s. And it was an objective. The objective of sustainable use, his sustainable use, was to make sure that there is a constant supply of forest resources, so that there's a constant supply of food resources and a constant supply of capital. So it was an objective. And this is also what we kind of see today, especially in Africa, when we look at the way sustainability frameworks are being implemented. It's always about, we need to do this by this time. And it's coined as a smart, smart way of doing things, or smart objectives, because it's always specified time, specified this, and then there are also indicators that are there, and so many boxes to tick. There's something too neat about sustainability which doesn't quite translate to the realities on the ground, the local histories, the knowledges and cultures and ways of living of people in Africa. And I think Maano and Emmanuel, you've written about this in our last project that we did together, about how some of these global dominant worldviews around sustainability or green ideas often contradict with the realities on the ground. So this is what has stayed with me, and I do have 2 questions for you, Maano, maybe points of clarification. And I'm not going to grill you, it's just for you to perhaps clarify a couple of things. And the 2 questions that I have are really around the political economy of sustainability, which you did touch on a little bit, but I perhaps want you to speak more about the entanglement of capital and sustainability, and the power of capital in shaping how sustainability looks like or should look like. So the first question that I have is, how does the influence of capital shape the way science informs sustainability in Africa? And precisely, to what extent do corporates determine which scientific solutions are prioritized in sustainability transformations? The second one is linked to the first, and this is really around the popularity of sustainability in crafting market-driven solutions. Whether we are talking about green finance, we're talking about carbon markets or corporate sustainability pledges, you know, there is a way in which sustainability always finds a place in market-driven solutions. And so some have argued that these market-driven solutions do not truly advance sustainability, but rather sustain inequalities and extractive systems on the continent. I would wonder, what are your views on these sentiments, and perhaps to respond more specifically focusing on this human condition that you talked about and the idea of transformation, and also the idea that I also like to use around Africanizing sustainability. How do we make sustainability look more like, or look more African, should I say? So these are the points that I have for now. Yeah, and I'll hand over to Emmanuel.
Hello, everyone. My name is Emmanuel Mugende. I'm based at the University of Botswana in the Department of Environmental Science. And just like Tafazwa, I'm also a student of Maano. So we worked together while I was still doing my PhD at UCT, and we do continue to work together. So is the student asking the master now, interrogating the master? So the key message that I got, I mean, is from Maano's presentation, is overall to say that sustainability, it has sort of multiple meanings. But also, when we look at it, mostly tend to sort of focus on the environmental. They sort of tend to have environmental bias towards sort of defining sustainability. And which version is chosen, then it sort of boils down to the issue of politics. And when we look at it at the current moment in terms of how sustainable world is sort of being advanced, is mostly and sort of trying to look at who sort of tries to drive this sustainable thinking. It's mostly dominated by the views from perhaps from the global north, and tends to neglect sort of the views from the global south. And that is mostly because the global south at times, we tend to be more dependent on the global north, for instance, for issues of foreign aid and so forth. And some of our issues, when we map all these things on sustainable thinking, they then reflect the context of the countries in the global north, leaving out the realities of African states, for instance. And when you look at it, for instance, one of the things when Maano talks about the human conditions actually missing. One of the things that is missing from sustainability thinking, I think, is the indigenous knowledge part of it, which has not been integrated into sustainable thinking. And yet today, if you look at African culture, it has mostly been shaped by indigenous knowledge over time. But we don't see that sort of appearing when we talk about sustainable thinking. So the question then becomes, how then do we sort of integrate the indigenous knowledge into sustainable way of thinking about the future as well? If you look at today, we see indigenous people, the discussions, we see indigenous people now as sort of Nobel Savage, who can actually help in biodiversity conservation, who can help also sort of in climate change. But their voice tends to be limited when it comes to also discussions around sustainability. So I think that's, to me, that's the key things that comes out of it. And also that we often tend then to accept that whatever that has been said, that this is sustainable, this is the way to think of sustainability, we tend then to accept that as the sort of our Bible. So we then don't then tend to think about other aspects that can make a sustainable future. So today we talk about transitioning towards a greener economy, but then we don't take into consideration the realities of African states. Like he said, there's a huge difference between South Africa and perhaps the countries in the north, in the global north. So how then do we then sort of bring, how do we create sustainable development goals then that speaks to the African continent amidst all these global superpowers that we have? I think that's sort of a bigger challenge that we have in today's thinking on sustainability. So my key question then to Prof is that how can then transformation to sustainability and development be achieved, particularly through the lens of trying to use the lens of the African state? And also, towards the end, you talked about trying to bridge history and as well as the future. And I'm here wondering, how do we do that? How do we try to bring these, to reconcile these two aspects of the history as well as the future? So that is it from me, Prof.
Okay, thanks. So this is becoming an intergenerational dialogue, which is fine. I asked the two of you because I thought what you have been doing since you were independent is exciting. Tafaza, your book with Professor Gude on extractions, and that was quite important. And I've never been working on extractions myself, but I'm reading that now. And Emmanuel, on your work in Botswana with groups of other people. On trying to understand the politics of sustainability there. So I thought this will be quite important. But it will also make me not to miss the wisdom from the students. I mean, I've benefited from the students I taught all the years because they challenge me to think differently. Of course, I don't have to pay fees to gain that knowledge. But to answer the question, so, I mean, capitalism and how it shapes sustainability discourses. Capitalism is a powerful tool. It has made us think that we can't live without money. Okay. And so we all have to, so money, the value that comes with money has changed the value systems of humanity. In other words, the more money I have, the more valuable I am as a person, and the more friends I will have. Okay? So it's sort of changed a number of things. But capitalism and sustainability, I think capitalism claims that it can fix the problems. Capitalism with their heart, that's what they have now. We are not that capitalism that is just destroying things. We can repair. We can exploit and repair. But in doing so, capitalism sustains itself. Okay, so I mean, let's just, when we had challenges of electricity here, which we still do have, we are told we are not out of the woods yet. But then there's green energy and solar panels, and where do they come from? Okay. And so how to maintain them. So it becomes another business. It is solving a problem. I mean, we're all drinking bottled water here, and of course this also ties to health, which is an important part. But in using these, the bottling companies know that they will have more money. People will keep drinking this. Whenever you go to the restaurant, people ask, do you need tap water or bottled water? Okay. And of course, you're most likely to say bottled water because, it's safe wherever you are. But that becomes a business. And so the business is very agile. The business sector, the private sector is very agile. It adapts every time you change something. And actually, business thrives on crisis. Whenever there's a crisis, people are looking for opportunities there. I understand when some few years back, when the housing prices were falling in Harare, that's where most people were investing there, because they know at some point this property will stand. Okay, and so you have business is always looking for opportunity. Now, within sustainability, I just showed a slide about the Huntington Place, where sustainability lives here. It's in a big sort of billboard to make sure that people know that we are looking after the planet, we are sustainable. But that is also a market. To create a market for people to know that if I maybe let me use example closer to home. When we go to grocery stores now, there's free range chicken, free range this or that, and we tend to think, well, this is good. I know I'm eating something fresh. It's not strained. It's not meat coming from a stressed chicken. But then you go to the village, you don't call them free range. I mean, they are there. Actually, they are more free range because they were just born in that environment. But we don't give them the value. Why? Because they're not in the market. We give those that we find in Checkers, Woolies the value because they are in those places, and that's part of the market. So when we move to sustainability solutions, and that's your second question, the solutions themselves are part of the market. So if we were to say, okay, we know this is the problem, we don't want your solution, then we will be called unsustainable. Because sustainability has to follow those kind of solutions. So we have got this logic of a problem that will bring along or create a solution that speaks back to the problem. Now, in order to cut this, one is to define the problem, so that you need a different solution altogether. So I think that's how one can deal with this in terms of transformation, is to redefine the problems so that we can come to very different solutions. Because if we all define problems in the same way, then there will be one solution. And that solution is usually market-driven. So that's how I will think of the political economy. I mean, you did mention the forester who many years ago was interested in the forest, saving them in order to to achieve certain goals, and that is still continuing today. And if one if one looks at thoughts about grass, about soil and so forth, then sustainability goes a long, long way back. But what I've just shown as a discourse is how in academia it became established as a field of study that is more futuristic. So that was the part that I was looking at. So Emmanuel, I'll start with the last one about how we Africanize sustainability, and looking at indigenous knowledge. Indigenous knowledge systems are becoming very important in different fields, including food. Now there's work on nutritious food, African foods that we should go back to. And of course, when you go to restaurants in Sandton, they will be called the delicates, and the price is up. So capitalism will go after anything. If you say this is an African dress or costume or whatever, you'll find it in the market. And so there is that aspect of appropriation of whatever is African. I mean, we know whenever you are at some of these shops, there's a small bag which has got the name "Out of Africa," and people usually carry it when they visit South Africa or any other African countries. You find them everywhere. You know, you found this out of Africa. So it has got value because it's coming here. But who is producing these bags? Okay, anyway, this is sort of the way I think about Africanizing things. I mean, many of the places have got African names, but you know they are not run by African entrepreneurs. It's just that you know you expropriate what is African. I think this is important for sustainability. It's to ensure that indigenous knowledge systems are also not appropriated, which unfortunately they have been. I mean, I know your country, Botswana, had mopani worms, which are known for protein. But that market has been invaded. You know, people have now been restricted to go and harvest mopani worms because they harvest that in the farm. So the property owners will say, no more harvesting here. If you go to Namaqualand, where I now and then go to see the flowers, the natural gardens, you know, some of those flowers are now in the farm. So you have got to pay a farmer to go and see these flowers. Okay? But these are just natural things that everybody should see. So you can always take this. We almost lost the IP for rooibos in this country. I mean, we had to fight hard to get, to keep it. And so whenever there's a market, capitalism would like to take over. So what is African is becoming a bit difficult unless Africans themselves give the value. I mean, we tend to move away from things that are African because we think they don't have value. Whether it's food or whatever. I think the way we value what is African is important. And it is for Africans to value those things in order to make them sustainable. Because if somebody is selling muhodu, the tribes, okay, which is cooked in the African way and nobody buys, the business goes out of the market. I mean, the 24th of September is always an exciting day for me because that's when African foods, African dress, and so forth are on display. But if you look at the African foods, it's, mokodu, the intestines and things like this. And one broadcaster asked an important question which I thought was not trivial. He said, I mean, were Africans only eating these things? But what happened to the whole cow? So there are also things that we think are African because they represent something. They are more representational than what Africans themselves have. And I think that's important. In conclusion, I would say that indigenous knowledge systems are important. My only concern is how the control of that indigenous knowledge, which is communal in most cases, is being taken over by the entrepreneurs. You know, you find medicinal plants, the pharmaceutical industry is after them. You know, and how do you keep them because they are communally owned? It's a tricky situation, but one has to think around it, you know, to be sustainable. Okay.
But you need to answer. Okay, thank you. I think the big thing for me that's just standing out from the conversation thus far is really the hegemony of capitalism as the big ideology. And while we are functioning within this ideological parameter of capitalism, which is really sort of skewed towards inequality, exploitation of resources, labor, it makes it difficult. And it could be just my Marxist principles just sort of coming out, but I don't think that we can really move beyond those restrictions. And then the other thing, I think the very powerful conceptualization that Maano has presented is the idea that how we engage with the discourse, the idea of a common future, which isn't really, you know, we've embraced it, this idea that we are so rigid and we don't question. If it's called sustainable, it's something that we need to embrace, no questions asked. So it's about challenging those parameters and also the discourse that we use to sell the notion of sustainability, where business comes and it co-opts this word, it co-opts what the meaning should be, and how sustainability will look, right? So Manu, when you were just saying, yeah, I was just thinking maybe it should be, you know, that we shouldn't even be talking about sustainability, but really sort of sustainabilities that's coming from different forms of transformations, and it's not going to be as common as we think. Okay, I'm going to stop there now. And then I'm going to hand over to the platform for questions. There's also online people, so we'll be mindful of the online questions as well. Is there one already?
Okay. Maano, thank you very much. I think this should have been an intersection of science, engineering, and ideology. And the reason why I say that, anybody else from engineering? Okay, at least there's another one there. Okay, because again, as you're talking about transitions and so on and intersections, I just made some copious notes. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to repeat all of everything else. But when we say sustainability, for me, it's simply continued existence. But continued existence of what? So that's the first question, Maano. I'm sorry, I just want to open my notes. Don't know why it's disappearing in front of me. Where is it again? So I can ask the other question, the main one. I'm not finding it, but how can humanity that is naturally avaricious then start talking about an ideology of a sustainable future that is common? How can humanity that is naturally avaricious?
Do you want to respond immediately, or should we take?
Because I'm sort of the questions ahead. Yeah, I should have included engineering there, but I wasn't. I'm always respectful of engineers because they're very precise on what they do. I mean, your second question is a big one. And that's what I was trying to get to. It ties to your suggestion about sustainabilities. And when I use Santon and Alexander, you know, it's sort of trying to get to this. Because we all want a better future. There's no doubt about that. We all want a better future, and that's why we're here. We're building a future. But if I were to collect ideas about the futures of everyone here, it will be different. So that's what sustainability should do. We should admit that the future there's no one future of all humanity. There are multiple futures of the people who live on this planet. And the planet will only be sustainable if these multiple futures are looked after, if these multiple futures are given the space to thrive, or they are also supported. And I think one of the things that really is painful for me is to see how some of the sustainable living of people is just destroyed for sustainability, for another form of sustainability. I mean, I've just, and I don't want to show this picture because it always demoralizes me. Sustainable cities projects, and there's one which is going on in Addis Ababa, and ordinary people's houses along what appears to be the main road. I mean, we always have the main road, in the South African cities and towns. These houses are being destroyed so that one makes rebuild the city, so to speak. And it's not only there. We have seen projects that wants to bring sustainability to that destroys networks that sustains people, and then says, well, this is for sustainability. Who are we sustaining here? And to come to a point, if sustainability is to continue the things that are there, then we should not be removing people in order to protect the environment. Because then it's almost like taking fish out of water, and it's going to die. And that's what we've been dealing with sustainability. There is this big picture of sustainability. We need to plant these trees. But there are people living here, so we must remove people and plant the trees. Or sometimes we plant the trees and then they take up the water, and people don't have the water. So there are all these kinds of sustainability ideas that are destructive. But we don't want to say sustainability ideas are destructive, because we have all been somehow made to believe that anything sustainable is good for humanity. And so I think that's a discussion we should have. And I mean, in engineering, with all the skills that engineers have, they should be part of these discussions about what a discipline like engineering could do to sustain what we have, add to what we have, rather than destroy and then rebuild, because that also becomes expensive. It's unsustainable economically. Yeah. So that's how I could maybe come around the questions that you have asked.
Okay. Thanks, Manu. Any other questions? Maybe just introduce yourself before you ask the question.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you, Prof. Maano. My name is Johannes Tseola. I have a long history with Prof. Maano. I won't say it because I don't want to be embarrassed. Prof. Maano, my reading of your work has always been that you're steeped in philosophy. And this is where I wanted to first make a comment in regard to Africa Futures. The vision is a pathfinder for Africa. I know this last comment say for Africa is also complicated because Africa is not like the same. There are differences in terms of the cultures and so on and so forth. Now, I want to believe that the task you have undertaken as the institution it's a necessary ethical public relations responsibility for Africa. But then, that's where the problems start. And Prof. Maano, you reminded me of Newton. When you spoke about engineering, he was asked, why are you not studying the world of humanity? And Newton's answer was that, you see, if what resides on God's left is on humanity's right, then the rightness and leftness of people is a complicating craziness and chaos of particularity, individuality, and incommunicability. That's, in essence, your lecture for me. It says you cannot hope for sustainability, whatever your thinking is, whatever it means in practical terms, unless you start with understanding that there can be no ideas of science is one. There are sciences. You can't do that and think of incontrovertible truths, because those truths may not be applicable in space and time depending upon the spatiality and the geography. And I thought you were challenging dogmatic science, and you were saying to us, even as scholars, as researchers, you're saying there's a problem in terms of what we do. Because if a student come to us, we ask them what is their theoretical framework. And you said there must be no cognitive fixity. This institution is trying to say, let us have transformations, plural. And my belief is we start with the politics of sustainability. As you say, go back to the philosophical frameworks undergetting the current practices of sustainability. And I want to believe the Institute will have to find a way to generate philosophy, ideologies, that then those ideologies will undergird the practice or the sustainability governance in Africa. But again, I want to repeat, that is not simple, because Africa then it's so complex with different belief systems and all that. But maybe you allow me a minute again. I want to say something that would help the future Africa to deal with that challenge which they started. And I want to believe they are aware of that. And this is to say, understand this concept of sustainability transformation as a matter of freedom and consciousness. That's why I said it starts with the academics, the publications, freedom and consciousness, and to understand that sustainability, transformation, or sustainability itself, whatever you define it, is not a natural right. Therefore, we have to engage in a protracted process of contestation, a struggle for ideas, to structure knowledge, in order to ensure that we'll ultimately get where we want to get to. I want to be very quick, because with what Africa Futures is doing, you have entered into the arena of power relations, politics purely, fighting about whose idea has the most desirable moral foundations for who. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So that's a comment, Prof. Maano, not really a question, unless you want to respond.
I want to appreciate the comment. Yeah, it's a question that our domains are engaging with, and in a month's time we will assemble here again on Africa Week to have more deeper discussions about issues that affect our continent, and that are defined by us. And I mean, one of the issues that I'm beginning to push for a deeper discussion from here is the socio-ecological debt. And you know, to come back to the question that you asked, which I didn't ask directly, you know, we need some form of reparation here. And I know that there have been lots of movements about reparations for Africa, but I've got a different I'm pushing for a different goal of reparations. It's not to say reparation must be paid by those who were here, you know, 360 years ago, but because the damage is being done on a daily basis, and we should pay for that. On the environment, on society itself, and so to rethink, and this comes from my work on restitution. Okay, I know it's a hot topic on land, and you know, incidentally, I work with Nerine in the presidential project, which was overseen by former President Kgalema Motlanthe. We did some work for you know, for Parliament, but I've always been thinking we pushing for a particular form of reparation, which is, okay, you know, you can give people land back, you can give them some money, but that's not enough. People didn't just lose these things; they lost cattle. They lost so many other things. And how does one actually pay for that loss at that time and put the value of today? And so I've been thinking, you know, from that work, I've been thinking a lot more about how do we get people over the line to say that now they can be sustainable on their own. Because sustainability would not mean that you keep giving people money. Okay, I don't want to give the example of grants because I'll be in trouble. But yeah, so it's you need to get people to sustain their own lives, and so I think what you've just said now about our role here of consciousness, and where that consciousness is founded becomes quite important. But we're going to have some discussions during Africa Week, which is the 25th to the 30th of May, and we'll all be here with different sessions. I'm sure you will get invitees. Colleagues who are here would have your names because you registered for this, so they can put you on the database and send you material. Yeah. So yeah, it's not a question. I appreciate the comment, but it's a tall order. It's a tall order, but we need to rise up to that. Okay, to rise up to it. Otherwise we'll just be like any other department.
Thanks, Manu. Next question. There's a quick hand here.
Thanks. My name is Stanley Ndagumba from the Albert Lutuli Leadership Institute, also responsible for SDG teaching and research. I always get fascinated by the issue of just the terminology, like sustainability. Why not sustainable development? But that's not my question. My question is really on this interface or intersection between science and ideology. Some of the scholars on critical management sciences arguing that they have ended actually, But the argument is really about the fact that the type of critique, scholarly critique that we are doing here has already been taken up by practitioners. A very practical example is what the new leadership at the US is doing. And one would argue that some of the choices that are being made, political choices, are actually informed by science. They would argue, given the absorptive capacity of that environment. It's a highly educated space and so on. So when someone says it's a greenwash, it's because they probably have picked up the camps in the scientific debates that are already going on. So would it apply to, let's say, choices that would be made by African presidents or African Union on the basis of debates that we're making here? And what are the implications that come with that? So for me, there is this issue of the big P, as in politics, as they happen in practice, and ideology, as in how we are engaging with scholarly and what are the consequences. It's probably maybe linked to that comment that came about the issues of what consciousness and how far does it go and how does it influence the realities, as in the big P. If tomorrow South African government chooses a similar type of approach as the US, let's say it's good to be on the far right nationalistic ideology, South Africa first type of thing, and those type of things, and drop off of the SDGs, drop off of the climate compact and all of that. And I'm just raising that because we cannot divorce the science, both natural and not so natural, from what then plays out in the intersection between science and ideological practices. So it's just a comment, really.
Thank you, but it does bring into the frame the current US situation and the ideological expressions about sustainability. So I don't know if you want to respond, Prof. Maano?
Yeah, I just appreciate the link between the two. I think it's, you have clearly drawn the links between the two. That some of the ideologies, well, most of them are also founded on science. We all know the story of China and COVID. The scientist said, well, there is a virus here, and just told, no, there is no virus here. Okay, and then we all have this wave, and so ideology has also the power to tame science. Scientists are becoming endangered species because what they find might be against the ideology of the day. And so while ideology is often supported by science, I mean, the ideology in this country historically, has been founded on scientific racism, for example. And so people believe this is how things should be. But what the ideology did actually was to establish so many institutions that we still have today. That science must go and dig into this so the ideology can work. Okay, so there's this dialectical relation between the two, where sometimes even if you're a clear example, of course, on the African continent is that most political science departments were very strong during liberation struggles because they were generating ideas that politicians, future leaders could use. But what happened when they became independent? They said, no, we don't need this anymore. We need administration. So we've got departments of administration and so forth. So there's this tendency to tame science if it is seen as a threat to ideology. And yet, ideology is very much dependent on science. And we need to be quite aware of at what point is the shift between ideology and science. Yeah. So that reminded me of these good examples that you made. Thanks.
Thanks, Prof. Maano. Any more questions? Here's one.
I'm Lame Kachena. To me, and thank you so much, Prof, for the powerful presentation. I think for me, I can say it's decolonizing sustainability. We're trying to question on whose sustainability and also why and what could be the future. But my question now is on the future with the current dynamics that are happening, especially with how technology is being taken as part of the answer in terms of sustainability. And currently, for the technology to properly function well, it's about energy. It's being supported by energy, and how energy is being extracted, especially renewable energy, which is associated with lithium mining, cobalt mining in countries like Zimbabwe, the DRC. That mining process or the extraction process of these energy minerals is also reflecting some kind of colonial inequalities in these communities or in these African countries. So what could be the balance now? And is it now the time for us to start to question the future of technology and its role in the sustainability kind of debate? Thank you.
Thanks.
To ask the engineers to respond to that. It's a good question. I mean, technology has become very powerful. Actually, it is to some extent controlling our lives. I mean, if I were to take away your cell phones here for the whole day, you will think you think life has stopped, okay? Because everything is there, the banking, everything is there. So the technology that is being used to extract resources in Africa on a continuous basis. Some of it, of course, is linked to how sustainability is thought about. We're going to have electric cars, okay? So where are we going to get the energy? You go to the DRC Congo, go to Zimbabwe to get lithium and so forth. And so you generate a different kind of activities in the name of sustainability, that we want to sustain the planet or humanity. But if you localize that, the destruction that's happening in those places, doesn't speak to sustainability. It speaks to environmental degradation. It speaks to impoverishing people around the places. It speaks to violence. It speaks to so many other things that actually make society not sustainable, in the sense that we cannot have society maintaining its existence on this basis, because it's so whether this is the time now to start saying we stop this, it's a difficult question, because we've always been saying after independence this must stop, and it has never stopped. It has never stopped because of the shifts in logics about things. And here we're focusing on sustainability, not perhaps geopolitics and things. Just on sustainability. The current extraction is founded on some of the ideas of sustainability, that we want to be sustainable. That's why we're doing what we're doing. But if we don't go back to the human condition, to the environmental condition even, then there is no sustainability. And I think if somebody stands up in a platform where all sustainability people are involved, and you say, well, there is no sustainability, they just chop your head. I mean, you think this is being crazy. But if we go back to the local level and say, what are we sustaining here? You know, people who are living in the Dugu forests in the Eastern Cape. Okay, what are we sustaining here? How can they become sustainable? So we should think of sustainable pathways at different levels. And to avoid cognitive rigidity, we need to say, well, this one is sustainable in this way, but not force the same way into the other society, other group or village or town or township or country. We need to differentiate these things and say, how do we take all this together so that we can have a more sustainable world? But we don't have that because of the power dynamics, where and the capitalism comes in there to say, well, you know, you're closing the market if you do that. I want the solutions. I want solar panels for the whole country. Okay, even those that are not are not connected today, we want to connect them. So that's fine. But then there's a business model for that. And some people will not be able to pay for these things. And that's what is happening with electricity bills. Because we said, no, you can't, this is how everybody should live. Now, if you can't afford, then you sort of can't live in that environment. And this is a big challenge, because how do you then model? Those who are doing modeling systems here will be very helpful to help us think through this. How do we model variation of sustainability? And how do we also ensure that the science takes care of the context under which sustainability should happen or should be supported? So that we don't speak of, if we speak of sustainability, as you say, Nareen. Yeah.
We have one question online. Lerato, can we hand over? So the online respondent, we just maybe briefly say who you are and which institution you're from, and then you can pose your question.
My question, and I'll start by apologizing, Prof, because it's more leaning towards the political side, and I noticed how you didn't want to dwell too much into that. To say that political will drives many of the actions that either advance or deter sustainability, the agenda of sustainability at different levels of society, be it at the international level, continental, country level, and ground level. And we do have some wonderful policies that reference the things that supposedly advance sustainability. They are evidence-based. They reference the need for indigenous knowledge, inclusivity, equity, all of those things. And they seem to work on paper, but more often than not, they don't seem to be working on the ground. So my question there is, where do you think governments are getting it wrong in ensuring the effective implementation of these policies to make them really work for communities or the benefactors on the ground? Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Tetson. Yeah, it's a difficult question to answer on behalf of politicians, because what goes on politicians' mind is the next term. It's so they're always thinking about being there for some time. They've got to sustain their own positions in the first instance. Okay? They don't do that necessarily by pushing for a policy change that doesn't what they want to be. But taking the examples of the policies in this country, and we can also say elsewhere where there are progressive policies, I think the thinking is good. The only challenge is that sometimes those who have come with the policies are not at the helm when they are to be implemented. Somebody else has been elected. And I was amazed by what Tanzania was able to achieve in 5 years under Magufuli, the late Magufuli, in 5 years. I couldn't, and this is where political will and drive can make a change. Because some of the, and of course he was criticized and is still criticized for not being democratic enough, but he had something that he wanted to do within 5 years. It wasn't like, I want to start a bridge and I'll complete it in the next 10. Okay. So that, you need to be re-elected in order to complete the bridge. It wasn't that kind of scenario. So I just think that politicians, and we do have some of them in the system, who are really driving things for change. But they do so because of many reasons, including their own commitment to change. There may also be questions of whether they're given the space to do so. So there are many factors that can actually make even people who want to drive change to find it very difficult to do it. And it's not only in government circles, it's in different organizations. There are people who can drive change, but they don't have the space to do so. So I think that it should be at the top where that drive is very strong, and then everybody else will have their own space to say they can. I wonder how these performance exercises in government, monitoring and evaluation as they call it, how that has worked. Because if you monitor and evaluate somebody who's not performing, then you should take them out. But you can't do that if actually you depend on them for your own existence. It becomes very complex. Maybe the systems the policies that we have developed are not well grounded enough for other people to drive it. I mean, are they dependent on one person? Do we need the minister to drive a policy, or do we need society to drive the policy? And if we need society to drive the policy, society should be part of policy making. And that space has been there, but now and then it gets closed, when there are too many voices that could work against some of the intentions. So I don't have a direct question to you, a direct answer to your question, Tedson, but that's my thinking at the moment is, how do we as a society make sure that the kind of policies we have do work? And this week there have been lots of discussions on gender-based violence, for example, about what needs to be done, and organizations that are working to try and get to that, because it's the dark side of this country. But of course, if we rely on just the minister or one policymaker, I don't think we will go somewhere. We need society we need the agency of society to be there in order to drive the change.
Thanks, Manu. Okay, so we are getting to that point where we need to conclude. I think there's one burning comment that you would like to make for 1 minute. 30 seconds, and then we will do the concluding remarks.
It was actually prompted by Prof. Maano earlier on. I forgot to talk about it. On people hearing you talk about ideology, they run away. And the problem, I think, is that we have like Future Africa is doing, is challenging the status quo. The hegemonic sustainability governance won't sit back and say, well done, challenge us, criticize us, destroy what we think is working. They will do what we call reflexibility fostering, which is respond to the challenge, make them sit back and relax and find yourself back at the same point where you started. And this is a very serious risk in the world. That is why we talked capitalism. That with capitalism, you can challenge it, do it next time, next year, we're doing the same thing all over. That's reflexivity. And that is why what hegemonic sustainability governance will cause future Africa to end up doing. Now, that is where we should not allow the ideology of fear to stop us from saying, future Africa, engage, because ideology is just a science of ideas. It's not like a complicated thing. That is why the consciousness, the freedom is necessary so that our students, our stakeholders can engage in the science of ideas. Because in terms of the current status quo, the prominent or the dominant science of ideas is doing this. It disciplines knowledge. Think of it. When knowledge is disciplined, it means you can't be creative outside that box. And we're not even sure what box that is. It disciplines willpower. That is why it causes fear, that our students cannot chart a new way of thinking. But what sustainability transformations is saying, we need to be creative, to be innovative. How do we get there if we don't challenge these things? Thank you.
Thank you so much. I don't know, Manu, we are approaching the end of it. I don't know if you want to make a few concluding remarks. Oh, it means I get to talk more. But I think we've really touched on a lot of issues. And as Manu's pointed out, I look forward to the African Week. Yeah, and I think a lot of these issues we will be able to unpack in more detail. The role of civil society, the role of politicians, where business will fit in as we sort of craft this way forward, because I think this was an important discussion in terms of setting the agenda for when we congregate later on with others, because these will be sort of recurring issues about these ideological interfaces and how do we, and because I'm a lot less philosophically embedded, but also talking about the ideas of how do we practically implement this agenda that we're articulating. So thank you for everyone that came today, that made time. I'm sure it was worthwhile to come and listen to the conversations that was here. I want to thank the two discussants for giving us those sparks of ideas to continue the discussion. Thank you, Manu, for enlightening us with your thoughts, your ideas, and I can also listen to him all day. I forgot to do the timekeeping. And then thank you for the organizers. I know that a lot of things happens behind the scenes, and for Future Africa for hosting us. Thank you.